Don't have any particular reason for that other than just variety being the spice of life. As I mentioned before, I wanted to do, we kind of started that, several lessons that I've got that we'll do throughout 2022, Lord willing, that all kind of center around leadership in various ways. And a lot of this material, it goes together, but it's enough material that there's just no way to cover it in one lesson. But I don't know, it kind of feels like, to me, it just feels more like a class, and I don't know, I just like being down on the floor, and sometimes I just like to do something different anyways. So, I'll be down here tonight. We began talking about this, I don't know, it was like 2 or 3 weeks ago, just in the general concept of leadership. And what I want to do tonight is to look at sort of a case study, I guess we could call it. That case study being Moses. When you think of leadership in the Bible, Moses is one of the first, if not the first person who comes to mind. He was a tremendous leader of God's people, and if you want to learn how to be a good leader, then study the life of Moses. And I won't go into as much detail as we did last time, but I will say sometimes we hear leadership and we automatically think in terms of, Chad's preaching about elders or some type of church leadership position. I'm not saying that that's off the table, obviously, but what we can sometimes do is sort of just tune out. Maybe I'm a young person, I think, oh, he's talking about leadership, that's elders. Well, if I ever am an elder, that's forever away, so, I can kind of just tune out. Maybe the women might think, well, I'm not going to be an elder, obviously, so they sort of tune out. And, my point being, there are all different ways of leading. We lead within our homes. Sometimes we lead in a secular situation. There's church leadership. There's just different ways. We talked this morning in the sermon dealing with the Great Commission. That's all about leadership in the context of leading others to Christ. Well, there's leadership involved in that. And so what we're looking at here when we talk about Moses, he's a picture. That's kind of how I saved it in my files. Joyce is always asking me on Monday, can you give me the sermon title for the lesson on Sunday? There you go, Joyce. Moses, a picture of leadership. So I've got that. I'm already ahead for next week. But, thinking about Moses, what makes a great leader? Because he was a tremendous leader of God's people. And I was looking for this Teddy Roosevelt quote. Where did I put that? I know I had it. I typed it up and put it in my notes. Oh, here it is. This is from Theodore Roosevelt, or as we often refer to him, Teddy Roosevelt, former president of the United States. It's one of my favorite. Man, I'm telling you, you talk about a quote machine. This guy had some awesome quotes. And sometimes they're just inspiring. Sometimes you read that and you're like, man, I would like to meet that dude because he was tough. And then sometimes there's kind of a little bit of both, and you're like, man, that's just awesome. This is one of those. It's a little bit of both, I think. But here's what he said. Far better it is to dare mighty things, to win glorious triumphs, even though checkered by failure, than to take rank with those poor spirits who neither enjoy nor suffer much, because they live in the gray twilight that knows neither victory nor defeat. They just sit on the sidelines, we might say. Sometimes we got to get in there, and when it comes to leadership is needed. And not just that, good leadership is needed. And again, look around you. Is that a need in the church? Absolutely. Is that a need in the business world? Absolutely. Is that a need in government? Absolutely. Is that, everywhere you go, there's a need for leadership and a need for good leadership. And here's something that when I was at GBN, I was still, I'm trying to think, this would have been, I would have been just in my early 30s when Jim Dearman comes to me and he says, look, Chad, it's getting to be a bit much. At that point, the Good News Today program had expanded to an hour-long program. He says, filling an hour's worth of program has been a lot. And then being program director on top of that, I'm really running myself ragged. He said, what I'd like to propose is we make you the program director. And I'm going to go full-time with the program and focus on that. And I said, okay, whatever's, and we kind of laughed because those were the early days of GBN. And, of course, GBN still is living off support. But in the early days of GBN, it was really tight. And Jim says, what that means is your title's going to change, but about nothing else. You're going to get more responsibility, same pay. And I said, look, hey, if this helps, I'm good with it. And if it helps you, if it helps the network, he said, well, it'll definitely help me. So we went with that. And so part of what I would do as a program director, we would have these production meetings every Monday morning. What's going on this week? Who's coming in to record? What programs are we doing? What programs do we have to get out to get down to Atlanta for the satellite uplink? And what's the deadline on this, deadline on that, and kind of in the works type stuff. And I don't know, we'd only done 2 or 3 of those, and a lot of those guys in the meetings, I'm kind of running the meeting, and I can tell that most of the guys in there are my peers, or some were older than I am, or I was. And I picked up on it, that at times they were kind of sitting there like, I'm as old as you are, and you're talking about some of this stuff, and I know way more about the whole video editing process than you do. And I don't even think it wasn't trying to be just negative or a bad attitude or whatever. And so one day, I don't know, it was almost like providence. I ran across this quote. And so I walked into the meeting that Monday, and I shared it with the guys. And I said, guys, listen, I want y'all to know that I respect, and believe me, I'm fully aware that many of you right here, you could do my job very easily. Sometimes I don't know beans about what you're doing in your specific job. But understand, Brother Barry Sr. at that time, I said, he has asked me to take this position as the director. I said, I know some of you are even older than me. Some of you have been here longer than I have. But he's asked me to take this position. And I said, I want you to consider something, a quote I ran across. And the quote was, if nobody is at the helm, the ship goes in circles. If nobody's at the helm, the ship just goes in circles. And I said, guys, I'm just here. I'm kind of trying to, I'm one of you. I'm working with you. This is not me trying to say, you do this, you do that, you do this. I said, I'm here for you. I will help you in any way that I can. If I can help you do your job by going in there and cleaning the nasty toilet, I'll do it. But somebody has to be at the helm. It has nothing to do with who's better than anybody else, who's above or superior to anybody else. It's everybody having a role and filling your role and doing the best you can in that role. But when nobody's at the helm, the ship is going to go in circles. Now, that's true in the business world. That's true in the church. That's true everywhere. We've got to have leadership. When I was at Greens Lake Road, it was actually a little bit before I went to GBN. The elders asked me if I wanted to teach a young adult class, Marriage and the Family. Reagan and I, we moved 2003, right, Reagan? October, yeah, because it was homecoming. We were there, first Sunday was homecoming day at Greens Lake Road. We got married May 18th of 2002. So here I am, October of 2003, and I'm teaching a marriage and family class. And you talk about feeling like a fish out of water. And I mean, it was very first class. I said, guys, brethren, of course, we'd gotten to be friends with those people already, just easy people to get to know and to love. And I said, but I want y'all to understand something. I said, I don't view myself as the teacher, per se, of this class. I'm just leading the discussion. I'm initiating some discussion because I know there were people in there. It was kind of the elders sort of had in mind young couples because we had a lot of them at Greens Lake Road at the time, but what happened was a lot of our couples that had been married 10, 15, 20 years came. So I'm sitting here saying, okay, I'm going to talk to marriage, the guy who's been married barely a year and a half maybe, and I'm going to talk to these people who've been married 15 or 20 years. But it was just kind of humorous to me. But I told him, I said, look, we're all in this together. I'm just here to facilitate the discussion. But again, in a class like that, if you don't have somebody who's sort of guiding the discussion, then you end up, you could just have people, it'd just be chaos. So we get the idea of the need for leadership. And it's something that we have a shortage of, or at least good leadership. A lot of people step up and they say, oh, I want to be a leader. Many times they just have no clue what it means. So we're talking about Moses and what a great, great example he is and was of true, good leadership. And so what characteristics do we see in Moses that are needed in leaders? I'll go ahead and tell you there are 12 of these. No, we're not going to cover them all tonight. I can promise you that. We'll see how far we get, and I put each one of these on a separate slide because it was harder for me to tell how many of these we'll cover. But I want to make sure we cover these, and I didn't want to just have to rush through if I completely ran out of time. So each one, like I said, we'll cover it and just see how far we can get. But what characteristics do we see in Moses that make a great leader? Number one, I was thinking about is enthusiasm. If you're going to be a leader, you need some enthusiasm, right? There's an old joke that says one lawyer was an older lawyer, had been practicing for many years. He was talking to a young guy just getting started, and he says, when the law is on your side, he says you got to really pound the law, and that's what you got to do. When the law's on your side, pound that law and be dogged with that. The young guy says, well, that's good advice. He says, what do you do if the law's not on your side? So sometimes that happens. He says, sometimes, though, you lean on precedent. You may not have a law per se where you could really fall back on that, but there's precedent. And when precedent is on your side, you pound the precedents, and you just stick to it and go after it like a dog on a bone. Okay, well, that's good advice, too. He says, what about, where he's going with that? He says, what about if, and he says, well, son, if neither the law nor precedent is on your side, then pound the lectern, because enthusiasm will accomplish about as much as either one of those. And it's so true. Enthusiasm. We've all been there. You've heard somebody who gets up and maybe they're going to talk. They used to tell us that in preacher school. I'm sure, Scott, you heard it when you were there in preacher school. If you can't put some fire in your sermon, put the sermon in the fire. They'd sometimes tell us, don't get up, say, well, I've got to say something. Get up because you got something to say. Something that maybe you've studied this, and that's one of the things I love about preaching is sometimes I've studied something, and maybe something I've preached before, maybe a text I preached before, but you're always learning something new, and I love being able to get up and share that with you all. And even, other places, if I go somewhere as a guest speaker, but as I always say, it's my favorite place to preach is right here. But to get to share that with y'all is a great joy for me. And so there's an enthusiasm that we need to have. They used to say, if you can do anything else besides preaching, do that, because, there are times when it gets difficult, times when it gets discouraging. But that love for it builds that enthusiasm. And there's a brother, I think I've told y'all about it before, that in a congregation where we were, and he would sometimes get up to do the announcements, and he was a great brother, and it was just, it wasn't even, I don't even know if it was a lack of enthusiasm. I think it's just a combination of nerves and just not his forte, but for some reason, it's one of those, Leroy used to use the expression, trying to put a square peg in a round hole. And it was a situation of that for sure. But he would get up and he would, want to welcome any visitors that we have. And I'm just sitting there and I'm like, what is happening? I'm thinking, I'm glad I'm not a visitor because I don't think I would feel very welcome. But he would always, every single time he had the announcements, he would sigh really heavily. The very first thing, and it was always like right into the microphone, and there'd just be this. And everybody in the audience is kind of like, wow. People buy into the person first. That's just a fact. And it doesn't change if a person is teaching something that is false, that is not biblical. It's not going to change that. It's not going to magically make that okay. But at the same time, people do buy in to the person. And here's a person over here that may have the truth, but he's very dry, he's very dull with it, and has no enthusiasm whatsoever for it. And you know what happens so often? Where the people end up flocking? To the guy that may be teaching just rank false doctrine, but he's fired up about it. Now again, it doesn't change the fact that it's false. It doesn't excuse people following a false teacher. But years ago, before I had even gone to preacher school, I'm just a kid, and I'm talking with another kid who since has gone so far into left field, I don't even know if I would call him a member of the church anymore. But he was from the Columbus area, and he was following this fella. I can't remember who it was now, but he was well known. He would go speak at a lot of the youth functions, and he was a known false teacher. Everybody knew it who knew him, but a lot of people liked him. A lot of people were scheduling him, and you know why? Because he could draw a crowd. He was a great speaker, and he got up and he was fired up, and he was enthusiastic. And I even talked to this fellow about him one time, this friend of mine, and we knew each other from backwoods camp. I said, brother, have you ever sat and listened to him? I said, some of that stuff he's saying, it's way off. And I'm not, like I said, I'd never been to preaching school. I'm like, I'm not a scholar. I'm not a preacher. But I knew it was not by the book. And you know what he says to me? He says, I know, Chad, but have you ever heard him speak? Man, he's amazing. And I told him, and I still mean this, I'd rather hear somebody that's dry and dull and preach the truth than to hear the most enthusiastic fellow preach error. But here's my question, and I know I'm not talking to a bunch of preacher students here, but why can't we, with the truth, get fired up about it and be enthusiastic about it? Sometimes I hear, and I understand everybody's style is different too, and sometimes we can say, well, somebody's not enthusiastic, but it may just not be that person's style. Again, you can't put a square peg in a round hole. But we can get fired up about the truth, just the same as those guys can get enthusiastic with error. But Moses, he was an enthusiastic leader. And kind of going with this, be open to new ideas. Again, a lot of this I've said kind of has a special application to preachers. But again, there's a larger application here. Be open to new ideas. Sometimes people have this mindset of, well, that's just not going to work here. Can elders fall into that mindset? Absolutely. Men of the congregation, if there aren't elders, I've worked with so many congregations, and sometimes you hear that. You make a suggestion, they say, well, that won't work here. Worked with a congregation years ago. I said, well, what about, it was a small community, and I said, what if we did like house to house, heart to heart? We tried that one time, it didn't work. What do you mean? We did that for like 2 years. I don't think we had a single conversion or study from that. But how did you use it? What do you mean, how do we use it? We mailed it. It's like, okay, now I'm starting to understand. Sometimes people have this mindset, though. They just say, well, that won't work. Or we tried that one time, it didn't work. Well, let's ask, if it could be a good, potentially good idea. Let's ask the question, why did it not work? Did it not work because it's not a good idea? Or did it not work because we were lazy and we didn't work the plan? And sometimes that's the answer. Or was there some other reason? Did we, we've used the expression several times, but did we try to put a square peg in a round hole? Did we put the wrong person in charge of it? We talked about that with personalities a few years ago. Sometimes you take a sanguine personality who is full of great ideas, but they're not always the best at implementing them and getting them off the ground and running and operating smoothly. And so we take a sanguine who comes in with a great idea and we go, man, that sounds great. You know what? I think you should be the person to implement that. And they're full of these great ideas, but a lot of times that personality is they may be all over the place. And now if you want to say, we're going to get Brother so-and-so over here, maybe a choleric type personality, he's going to work on it. What we'd like for you to do, Brother Sanguine, is could you help us generate some support within the congregation or within the company or whatever the situation may be? Now you got the round peg in the round hole, because he says, you got it, man. And that's what a sanguine will do. They'll generate the enthusiasm. They'll get the support, because that's just kind of how their personality works. But they're not always the best to implement it. But why didn't it work? Sometimes people just throw it out there. Well, we tried that and it didn't work. Be open to new ideas. And we're coming to this in the life of Moses. Colin Powell once made this statement: leadership is all about people. I really like this. It's so true. It's not about organizations. It's not about plans. It's not about strategies. It is all about people, motivating people to get the job done. You have to be people-centered. That's so true. And so many times in the workplace, people think leadership is about organization, the organization itself. They think maybe it's about meetings. And you can replace plans there, I suppose, with meetings. That's one of the most frustrating things. I've worked in the secular environment, not even high-level management, but stuck in meetings sometimes till you just want to scream. And I used to say, and this was at GBN, it was the church, run and worked by members of the church, but sometimes we fell into that same trap. Meetings are like black holes, okay? Nothing gets out of that room. There are these great ideas that are just flowing. I mean, the creative juices are going in that room, but it's like when you open that door and people are allowed out, but not ideas. No action on those ideas. It's crazy. You walk out of that room and you have all these great ideas, and then they fall flat. And I think sometimes, I don't claim to have all the answers for that, believe me. If I did, I'd be a very wealthy person. But sometimes it's just a forgetting that leadership is not about meetings or organizations or plans or strategies or whatever. It's about people. It's got to be about people, people-centered. Let's go to the book of Exodus. And we'll look at a lot of passages in the book of Exodus as we study Moses and how he's the picture of a great godly leader. But Exodus 32 it's probably a familiar account to you. You see, Moses, he's all about people. He loved people. He listened to people. In other words, he was open to new ideas. But he was a great leader first and foremost because he loved people. And he loved the people that he led. Look at Exodus 32. Let's begin around verse 9. The Lord tells Moses there, this people is a stiff-necked people. Let me alone. Of course, God tells Moses, he says, you better get down from this mountain because the people they're into mischief. They've begun to worship an idol. Moses was up on the mountain 40 days, 40 nights, and they're kind of, where is Moses? So they give Aaron their gold, and he makes this golden calf. And so God says to Moses, let me alone, verse 10, that my wrath may wax hot against them, and that I may consume them. And I will make of thee, Moses, a great nation. You think about how many leaders, so-called, today would hear a statement like that. Should God speak in that way to them, that would go, well, you'd be hard-pressed to do much better, Lord, than to make a whole new people just for me. Well, what a great idea that is. I mean, how many people would do that? Or think, oh, wow, what an honor. But Moses, it's like he doesn't even blink. He besought the Lord. He begged the Lord. Lord, why doth thy wrath wax hot against thy people, which thou hast brought forth out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Wherefore should the Egyptians speak and say, for mischief did he bring them out, to slay them in the mountains, and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from thy fierce wrath, and repent of this evil against thy people. He says, remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, thy servants, to whom thou swearest by thine own self. Says unto them, I will multiply your seed as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have spoken of will I give unto your seed, and they shall inherit it forever. And the King James has the Lord repented. We would say, as the newer versions have it, relented of the evil, the calamity, which he thought to do unto his people. So God changes his mind. He listens to Moses there, who intercedes for the people. You could drop down to verse 30. Moses says to the people, he turns to the people and he says, you have sinned a great sin. Now I will go up unto the Lord. Peradventure I shall make an atonement for your sin. You know, if I'm Moses, I might be real tempted to say, you know what? God can do what he wants with you. I mean, I'm up on the mountain for a few days and you all of a sudden decide, oh, Moses just didn't coming back, and you make this idol and you worship an idol. You know, it'd be very tempting to just sort of throw your hands up and say, do what you want with them, God. I'm done with this people. Don't ask me to lead them anymore. But not Moses. He's a people person. He loves these people. He's all about people. And so he says, I'm going to go and I'm going to see what I can do and intercede for you. And so he returned unto the Lord, verse 31. Oh, this people have sinned a great sin, and have made them gods of gold. Yet now if thou wilt, forgive their sin. And if not, blot me, I pray thee, out of thy book, which thou hast written. And if you go backwards a little bit to Exodus 18, you see this situation there in Exodus 18, beginning at verse 13, where you have Moses' father-in-law who comes there, and he watches, beginning in verse 13, he's just observing this. Moses sits to judge the people morning to evening. And Jethro, to sort of paraphrase, he says, what are you doing, Moses? I mean, you're just going to wear out. You're going to wear yourself out. You just, all day long, you're judging these cases? Can't you appoint people over, you know, what does he say, hundreds and I forget all the divisions that he says, but he says, you know, you can appoint people over different divisions of people, and they can handle it. And then if there's some really difficult case or something that requires you, and maybe you speaking to God and getting a judgment from God, then they can come to you with those. But why just sit all day long and do this? You're just wearing yourself out. And you know what Moses says? Some people, some so-called leaders today might say, you know, get out of here. You're not even one of the Israelites. We're God's people. We don't need any advice from you. You're just a old heathen. No, he says, you know, that's good advice. You're right. And he implements that. Moses, he loved people, he listened to people. Enthusiastic leadership. Well, let's talk about another characteristic that made him a great leader. Desire. Stay in Exodus and just go to Exodus chapter 2. Exodus 2:11, beginning. Came to pass in those days when Moses was grown. Of course, he's grown up in Pharaoh's house up to this point. He went out unto his brethren, and he looked on their burdens, and he spied an Egyptian smiting an Hebrew, one of his brethren. He looked this way and that way, and when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. He goes on the second day, behold, two of the Hebrews strove together, said to him, Moses says to the one who did the wrong, wherefore smitest thou thy fellow? And he said, who made thee a prince and a judge over us? Who put you in charge? Well, nobody had up to that point, right? A little bit later, Moses could have said, well, God did. And of course, he will say that sometimes when he's questioned. Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Intendest thou to kill me as thou killest the Egyptian? And Moses feared and said, surely this thing is known. Now you need a little bit of divine commentary on this, and you get that over in Acts 7:25. Stephen, in the midst of his sermon, is talking about Moses and this incident here in Exodus 2. And he says, speaking of Moses, for he supposed his brethren would have understood how that God by his hand, by Moses' hand, would deliver them. And it's interesting because when God actually does call upon Moses to lead, what happens? He's kind of like, whoa, pump the brakes here. You know, I'm nobody. And of course, he goes through the excuses. And finally, his final excuse is, could you just find somebody else? But he desired to lead the people. I say all that just to say this. There is a time for persuasion. I understand that. But ultimately, a leader has to desire to lead. When you get into Exodus 3 and 4 and Moses' excuses, I think when you begin to study that and peel back the layers, I think there's a lot more going on there. It's not so much a lack of desire. It's a man who has gotten some humility, and now he's kind of saying, am I really up for this? I'm not sure I knew what I desired. And it's not so much, Lord, that I don't want to do this. I just don't know if I'm able. You remember Solomon? That's what he said. God said to Solomon, you can ask me for anything you want. Solomon says, could you just give me wisdom? Because who can lead this thy so great a people? And that's kind of how Moses is. But he desired to lead God's people. Again, you get to Exodus 3:11 through, all the way through 4:17. And I kind of compare that or maybe even contrast that with 1 Timothy 3:1, where Paul there says, and again, there's larger application, but here we're specifically looking at the position of an elder in the Lord's church. But he says, if a man desire the office of a bishop, he desireth a good work. I believe, and I think you'd be hard-pressed to argue otherwise, that he's stating there very clearly, desire is one of the qualifications for an elder. What I have seen in my lifetime, it's been a while since I've seen this, but I have seen it in congregations where they say maybe they'd had elders previously, now they don't, or maybe they're trying to get to the point of having elders, and it's like we sometimes use the expression a witch hunt, but it's kind of like that, except they're looking for elders. Who could be an elder? If we could get brother so-and-so. If there is that one thing, maybe that's not that big a deal. We could get him, and is there anybody else? And they find, oh, man, brother so-and-so is a shoe-in. I mean, he's faithful. He's got a good reputation in the community. His kids are just, they're good, faithful kids. Let's go. That one's easy. But they go and they talk to brother so-and-so, and he says, I'm sorry, guys. I don't really have a desire to serve in that capacity. Maybe 100 different reasons why. Maybe I got too many commitments with my job. I can't devote the time, and a shepherd has to spend time with the sheep. It may be that he says, there's sickness in my family or whatever. I don't have the time. It may be that he says, or at least I wouldn't where I was, but I heard about a situation through a preacher friend that there was a guy that was very much qualified, but he said, this is a heavy, heavy burden. And respect to him, because it is. And I appreciate the sobriety with which he treated the office of an elder. And he said, I don't feel qualified. I don't feel that I'm up to knowing that I'm going to answer for souls before the judgment bar of God. He said, I'll think about it, and the time may come, but right now it's a no. And what happens in those situations sometimes is they start proverbially twisting the arm. Come on now, brother, they may say, we've never had elders in this congregation. We got brother so-and-so over here, and he's qualified, and if you agree, that's two. Come on now. You're not going to believe the church without elders, are you? And you start doing all this. Now you tell me, how good a job is somebody going to do? They don't desire it, but somebody has talked them into it. I've seen this happen with preachers. They get talked into leaving a good work, a solid congregation, talking them. Finally, they leave, and they didn't really want to go to that place, but suddenly they find out that, I'm not so happy over here. Well, of course not. You didn't desire to go there. You just kind of got talked into it. It happens in so many areas. And so, the question there on the screen is when? When do we persuade? How much do we persuade? And those are questions that they kind of have to be answered case by case, because, if there is someone who says, look, I realize what a heavy burden it is to be an elder in the church. I'm not sure if I'm ready for that. Then that's somebody that might, a little bit of persuading wouldn't hurt. I still don't want to go too far because I don't want to, hey, being an elder is not easy as it is. It's somebody that desires it. But if I just get talked into it, when the going gets tough, what are the chances that you stay with that? But persuasion is not a bad thing. In fact, even when it comes to leading people to Christ, Paul says what? 2 Corinthians 5:11, knowing therefore the terror of the Lord, we persuade men. But you just want to be careful with that. And in fact, sometimes more persuasion is in order, because there's some situations where, sorry, you got to step up. A man may be nervous. He may be scared. Man, I'm a brand new father. I don't know if I'm ready for this. I don't know if I'm ready to lead. Well, guess what, buddy? You've sired a child. You're a father now. There's no getting around that. So that's the time when you're going to have to, you certainly could and should lean on somebody. Step up to the plate and lead. Lead your family. Somebody may say, a Christian male may say, well, I don't know if I'm up for being the leader of my household. Well, buddy, you're married, and especially if you have children, here you are. Step up and lead. But then when it comes to something like an elder or other leadership positions, there may be times when it's better not to push, because you get somebody in there that doesn't desire to lead, it's not going to do much. And as well as I do, a lot of people, they murmur and complain, but they themselves, they're not willing to lead. My kids and I, we get tickled because there's a lady in the hockey league where they play hockey, and she's a board member of maybe even no, not VP, but she's one of the board members, and so knowing that, a lot of people will go to her and they've got something they want to fuss about or whatever. And she's kind of famous for saying, when somebody comes and says something, she'll immediately say, well, you know what? I'm really glad you came, because we have at least 2 open board positions right now. And so what we'll do is we'll get you to come to the next open meeting. I will nominate you. Mr. So-and-so over here, he's going to second it, because if I nominate you, and he'll know that's on the up and up. And by this time, the guy's going like, whoa, 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 whoa. And she's like, oh, well, surely you're not coming in with a complaint, and you're not willing to step up and help. And it's funny, because sometimes you can sort of see the people like sheepishly turn and like, no, we're good. You know what? It's not really that big a deal. People are willing to complain. Almost like a veiled criticism of his style or something like that. And so he says, here's what you need to do. You can reach so many more people. Did my battery go dead? I didn't know. About 30 minutes. I was waiting on it. Scott beat you to it. So. Okay, there we go. Sorry, y'all. Especially for Sister Becky and some others that are watching the live stream. My apologies. I didn't realize that had gone out. So let's just go back to point number one. No, I'm just kidding. But a lot of people complain and they're not willing to lead. So this fellow was talking to Brother Keeble one time, and he says, again, kind of came across very arrogant and critical. Your method's not very good. Your style's not very. If you did this, you could do so much more for the Lord or win so many more souls. And Brother Brinker says it's so funny because Keeble was such a humble man, but he did get at least put out enough that he sort of says to the fella, how many people have you studied with or baptized into Christ this year? I'm not really sure. I mean, just give me an idea. And he says, I'd say maybe a dozen or so. And he said, the last tent meeting I did, there were 33 that came and obeyed the gospel of Jesus Christ. Are you preaching somewhere right now? Well, no, I'm not a preacher. Are you going to preach? Do you do any meetings or anything like that? No. And Brother Keeble said, well, brother, with all due respect, I like what I'm doing a whole lot better than what you're not doing. The brother wanted to criticize and complain, but he wasn't out there doing the work. And I've heard that. That's the first time I'd heard that story told about Brother Keeble, but I've heard the expression before of somebody who says to a complainer, hey, I like what I'm doing better than what you're not. Sometimes people will complain to the leaders or leadership, and then you suddenly find out, well, what are you doing to help better this situation? God help us all to step up in that situation and say, I want to be a part of the solution. I've often told our elders here, I don't ever want to bring a problem to them without at least a suggestion for a solution. Now, they may look at my suggestion and say, no, clearly this is not the best way to handle that. This is not the best solution. But at least I've tried to do something to contribute and not just be the guy who's dumping problems. You see what I'm saying? That can be a temptation. There's got to be a desire. And again, God give us more people who desire to step up and lead. I'm not just talking about in the eldership. I'm talking about in various areas of life to step up, lead people to Christ, lead people in the way that they should go. In the secular environment, to lead people as a selfless, godly leader should do. And of course, spoiler alert, that's one of the ones we'll talk about later on, selflessness. Let's put a peg here. I was hoping to get at least 3 of these tonight, but I think I don't want to take up too much time. So we're going to put a peg here and stop with that part of leadership. The qualities that we see in Moses being desire and enthusiasm. But the world needs leadership. Again, those who enthusiastically will lead others to the Lord, those who enthusiastically will set an example of service in the body of Christ and say, be imitators of me, be followers of me, even as I also am of Christ. So that there's an example and leaders out front, we sometimes say. Forging away and saying, I'm determined I'm going to heaven. And I'm not the sour, unenthusiastic, Brother Elkins used to say, like you were weaned on a pickle. You're not going to be like that. We're going to be enthusiastic. And we're going to say, you know what? I want to set an example of leadership, leading others to Christ, leading others to heaven, because I'm excited about it, because it's the best life there is. The Christian life, there is no better way to live life. There is no better way to die at the end of this life than as a faithful child of God. We need that kind of enthusiasm. We need those who desire. Sometimes people say, well, I just want to show up, and then when services are over, I'm going to leave and go home. We don't need that. We need enthusiastic desire to say to others, as Paul did, be followers of me, even as I also am of Christ. Are you a Christian this evening? Leading others to heaven is kind of impossible if I'm not on the way to heaven myself. Are you a child of God? If not, All things are ready, as the song says. We've got the heated baptistry. We've got everything we need to change the clothes, all of that. You can obey the gospel tonight and become a child of God, a new creation. As a child of God, if you're not where you need to be spiritually, you can take the lead. It may be the lead in your family. It may be the lead among friends. It may be the lead among whatever. And you can take that lead, that initial step, the initiative, and say, I'm going to get right with God. Can we help you with that tonight? If so, that's why the invitation is extended. Won't you come while we stand and sing?